So this is topic 12. We're going to start with soils and then get into the discussion of groundwater. So what is soil? Soil is a combination of weathered rock material, organic matter, water, and air. And the organic matter comes from living organisms that then died. So dead leaves, for example, branches that fell off of trees, dead animals. Soils are considered to be an interface because they form where the geosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere meet. Some other vocabulary that we need to know related to soils include regolith. Regolith is a layer of rock and mineral fragments that is produced by weathering, and the regolith covers most of the Earth's land surfaces. And soil is the portion of the regolith that supports plant life. Then we have the word humus, and that's carbon derived by bacterial decay of organic matter. And again, organic matter is decayed remains of plants and animals, or decayed organic matter is humus. So humus is also decayed organic matter. And then we have the term pore spaces. Those are spaces in between soil particles that can be filled with either air or water. So why is it important to study soils? Soil is an important component that supports life. It supports vegetation or plant growth. Plants derive most of their nutrients and water from the soil that they live in. And then plants support the rest of the food chain by assimilating the nutrients from the soil and then making those nutrients available for animals to consume. And those nutrients, many of them come from the weathering of rocks. So plants are important for the rest of the food chain, and soil is important for plants. So what is soil made of? The same four components make up all soils in varying ratios. So when examining soil that is in a good condition for supporting plant life, it will generally contain the following. Almost half will be weathered rock material or mineral material, mineral matter. About 25% will be water in the pore spaces. About 25% air in the pore spaces. And about 5% humus, which again is decayed organic matter. So then there are different factors related to how soil forms. If it forms quickly, if it forms slowly, if the soil layers will be thick or thin. So the parent material, climate, plants and animals, time, and topography are all factors related to how soil will form. And then we're going to go through all of those in more detail. So the parent material, that is the source of the weathered mineral material from which the soils develop. So that's basically the rocks that are associated with the landscape that ultimately undergo weathering and add into the soil, or become soil. Become a component of the soil. The parent material can be unconsolidated sediment deposits, or it could be hard, solid bedrock. When the local bedrock is the parent material of the soil, the resulting soil is called residual soil. When the parent material is unconsolidated sediment deposits that were brought from somewhere else, such as deposits that you might find in a floodplain, because a floodplain, the deposits came from further upstream. And then again, during a flood, the deposits would end up in the floodplain area. But those sediments came from upstream. Also glacial till, because the glacial sediments came from elsewhere and they were carried to a new location within the glacial ice. So then if the floodplain deposits or the glacial till turns into soil, that soil would be called transported soil. And the parent material influences soil in two ways. It influences the rate of weathering and thus the rate of soil formation. So unconsolidated materials will turn to soil faster than bedrock because they were already partly weathered. Unconsolidated materials are already broken down into smaller pieces than solid bedrock. So they're already broken down. And some rock types weather more quickly than others. So for example, limestone weathers faster than granite. So if the parent material is limestone, it'll break down faster and turn into soil more quickly than if the bedrock were granite. And the second way that the parent material influences soil is the mineral and chemical composition of the parent material affects how fertile the soil is. Fertility of soil affects the plant life that grows on the land within the soil. So the more nutrients you have, the more fertile the soil. The next factor that we're going to talk about is climate. That's the most important factor in soil formation. And keep in mind that climate generally varies by latitude. Climate includes temperature and precipitation patterns. So climate is so important to soil formation because it affects the rates of the soil formation. That's because chemical weathering of rocks and minerals occurs more quickly in climates that are warm and wet. In other words, a tropical climate. Thus, you get increased soil formation in tropical regions. Also, climates with intense rainfall leads to leaching of minerals. And we'll talk about what leaching means a little bit later. But it's generally when you have a lot of rainfall, the water goes through the soil and picks up soluble materials and carries it away, carries the soluble materials away. And that affects soil. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes, a little bit more in a few minutes. So wet and warm climates are going to be dominated by chemical weathering of rocks and minerals and are going to yield thicker soils. Cold, dry climates are dominated by physical weathering processes. And cold, dry climates have less precipitation to help break down rocks and minerals. So you don't have as much chemical weathering. So cold and dry climates are going to have thinner soil. So back to leaching. Leaching is a process that involves water removing minerals and other materials from the soil. So this leaves the soil with fewer nutrients that would be available for plants. You get more leaching when you have more rainfall. So the more rainfall you have, the more it's going to leach the nutrients out of the soil and affect the fertility of the soil. This is just a little cartoon showing you leaching. Okay, this is intense rainfall. Goes through the ground and so you're picking up soluble materials that are in the soil and it gets carried downward further, or it gets carried away in runoff, for example, or in groundwater. Another factor related to soil formation is plants and animals. So the decay of dead plants is the main source of organic matter to soil and humus. Animals contribute to a lesser extent. So plant and animal remains provide the organic matter to soil. Soils related to bogs and swamps will have higher amounts of organic matter. Those soils will be composed almost entirely of organic matter. In contrast, desert soils may be composed of less than 1% organic matter. And that's because there's less vegetation in a desert area to decompose and add plant material to the soil. So decomposed organic matter, or again, that word humus, in the soil supplies important nutrients to plants, animals, and microorganisms that live in the soil. So microorganisms like fungus and bacteria feed on the organic matter and break it down, and that forms the humus. That's the decay of the organic matter. The fertility of soil is related to the amount of decomposed organic matter in the soil. Organic matter also helps with soil water retention, keeping the soil moist. There are some microorganisms that help with nitrogen fixation. That means that those microorganisms are able to convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form of nitrogen that can be used as a nutrient by plants in the soil. Okay, so that's called nitrogen fixation. So that's helpful for the plants in the soil. Earthworms and other burrowing animals help to mix the soil, as well as help water and air to pass through the soil. So they aerate the soil. We can add that word as well. Okay, when the earthworms travel through the soil, they are mixing it and it aerates the soil, which is helpful for plants. And then another factor related to soil formation is time. Soil needs time to develop. If soil in an area is relatively new soil, it will be similar in character to the plant, to the parent material. So if it's a new soil, it'll be more like the original bedrock that it came from, for example. The longer soil has been forming, the thicker it becomes and the less it resembles the parent material. It can take 80 to 400 years for soil forming processes to create 1 centimeter of topsoil. So it takes a long time for soil to form. And then another factor related to soil formation is topography. Variations in topography can lead to the development of a variety of different local soils. And this variability is mainly related to the steepness of slopes. So on a steep slope, the soil is going to be poorly developed. That's because you get rapid runoff. So you end up with lower soil moisture, and fewer plants are going to be able to live on a steep slope. Also, you have more erosion on a steep slope. So on a steep slope, the soils are going to be thin or non-existent. While areas at the base of a slope tend to be poorly drained with stagnant water. So they're going to be waterlogged soils. And then on flat land that's not at the base of a slope, the flat land, the soil is not really affected as much by erosion, so it is able to become well developed and thicker. So farming is going to be better on flat land that's not at the base of a slope, where it would be waterlogged. It would just, you'd want just flat land. So then we could talk about how to classify soils and how to describe soils. So this is a soil profile. The soil profile shows a cross-section of the soil layers, and we call the soil layers horizons. And they differ in their texture and structure and composition and color. So the soil layers from top to bottom are called horizon O, A, E, B, and C. So O is generally your organic material, your humus layer. And they're showing you it is like a darker black color, rich in organic material. A is also called the topsoil. And then you have your transition, E, subsoil, B, and then C is going to include your weathered bedrock. That's your transition to the solid unweathered bedrock below the soil layer. So not all soils have all of the following soil horizons. Following being that I'm going to go through all of these in more detail. Okay, but not all soils have all of these layers. So horizon O, again, is organic matter. It's only a few centimeters thick. The upper part of the O horizon is plant material like leaf litter, branches, things like that. And the lower O horizon is humus, which is the decayed organic material. So in autumn, when the leaves fall off the trees, you get layers of leaf litter. And then lower down, where the leaf litter starts to decompose, that's going to form the humus layer. You also get lots of microorganisms within horizon O, like bacteria, fungus, algae, and insects. Horizon A is mostly mineral matter as well as humus. And together the O and the A make up the topsoil. Horizon E is lighter colored and it has little organic matter. Okay, so again, your E is a lighter color. It does not really have organic material in it. That is called the zone of leaching. So water goes into the soil layers from the top, like it rains, for example. And The water is going to go through the soil O and the A layers. It goes through the E layers, and the water will dissolve minerals from the soil and carry them downward, generally into the B layer. Okay, so it rains, rain, 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 rain. Okay, water passes through the soil and it picks up materials that are soluble, which means they're able to be dissolved in water. So it picks those minerals up from the E layer and carries them downward. So E is the zone of leaching. Okay, here's another diagram of that, actually. The rain entering the grounds. Okay, and in this diagram, they're kind of eliminating the O and the A horizon. They're just showing you the zone of leaching here. Okay, and here the plus and the minus are little ions. Those are the dissolved minerals. Okay, so here, downward percolating water transports ions and clay. Okay, so water that's going down is picking up ions from dissolved minerals and clay particles. And then it accumulates lower down in the zone of accumulation. The horizon B is the zone of accumulation. That's your subsoil. That's where those finer particles and dissolved materials removed by horizon E, we call that alluviation. Those particles are going to accumulate and form irregular masses of minerals or layers of compacted clay. So I'll just add the word leaching here as well, because that's what we were talking about before. Then horizon C is your partially weathered parent material, which transitions to unaltered, unweathered parent material below. Okay, so below horizon C is basically your bedrock. Okay, so here's horizon C, your weathered bedrock, transitioning to just the plain bedrock that has not been weathered. So that's the original parent material of the soil. And then this is a photo of a soil profile. So you see down here is your weathered bedrock, your subsoil, which was horizon B. That is your zone of accumulation. So you have this red and orange clumping in here. That's your iron oxide that has accumulated down here in the zone of accumulation. This is your horizon E because it's a lighter color, right? Horizon E was lighter in color. And then this is your O and A at the top. Notice that there's transitions that are slightly gradual. It's not like strong markings, like a straight line in between your layers, like the diagrams show. Okay, it's more like a little bit of a gradual transition. Then we have something called soil orders, and this is how we classify soil types. So here are different words. These are the soil order names, and then these are the descriptions of those types of soils. So like an alpha soil is a gray-brown soil with a subsurface clay accumulation and abundant plant nutrients. It forms in humid forests. Andesol is a soil that forms in volcanic ash. Mollisol, soft black, rich in nutrients, forms in subhumid to subarid grasslands. Okay, so you could read through that. And then here is a map showing you where you have the different soil orders. Okay, so we can zoom in and look at, let's say here, this orange zone over here. What is that orange zone? That orange looks like inceptisols, right? This orange here, okay? So that's your inceptisols. So we go back, inceptisol, moist, has poorly developed horizons. It formed recently. Okay, so that's an example that it shows all of the orange formed recently, right? When you look in the middle of the country, you have that green. Some of that is light green, and then some of it is the darker green. So the middle of the country is where we have the grasslands, where we have a lot of our farming, a lot of the farming in this country goes on in the middle of the country, right? So that's mollisols, some alphasols. So we can go back and look. Mollisols again is soft, black, rich in nutrients, forms in subhumid to subarid grasslands. Okay, so the middle of the country has really good soil for farming. It's nutrient rich. Okay, so you can explore the map, take a look at different areas that you might be interested in. So then I'm just going to skip ahead to this for a second, but this is showing you the thicknesses of different soil layers. So tropical soils are deep, very deep soil, right? The bluish purple color is unweathered bedrock or sediments, okay? And then the rest of the colors are soil. And then the top black layer is the humus. Okay, so in a tropical zone, you have very deep soil, very thick, and then your humus is kind of thin compared to the thickness of the rest of the soil. Your desert, you have some humus, but the thickness of the soil is very minimal, okay? So very thin soil. And then your temperate, which is like where we live here in the Northeast, we have a temperate zone. So you're going to have a moderate thickness, okay, not extremely thick and not extremely thin. You have a moderate thickness of soil. And we do have a significant amount of humus in different parts of temperate zones. Okay, it's not all going to be exactly the same in all temperate areas, but generally temperate is going to have a moderate thickness of soil. And then here's your polar region, minimal amount of soil to almost no soil at all, depending on how far you are towards the pole. Okay, so that brings us to this. You have a desert soil profile. Desert soils are aridosols. Okay, the word arid is in there. Arid means dry, a dry climate. So there's not really any O horizon. You have something called caliche. Caliche layers form. Caliche is calcite, calcium carbonate that builds up in the zone of accumulation. It's like a crusty clumping of calcium carbonate that builds up in the soil. So that's caliche. Okay, and you see your topsoil layer is pretty thin. Then you have your temperate soil, which is a lot thicker. Those are generally alpha soils. There is an O horizon. The materials that accumulate in the B horizon are less soluble materials compared to the desert soil, which has only soluble minerals accumulating in the B horizon. So in your temperate soil, you also get iron oxide and aluminum oxide accumulate in the zone of accumulation. You also have a nice thick amount of humus. And then you have your tropical soils, oxisols, where percolating rainwater leaches all soluble minerals and leaves behind only iron and aluminum rich residues. So you get these very thick, bright orange iron oxide and aluminum oxide rich soils, and aluminum hydroxide as well. So laterite soil, which is an oxisol in a tropical soil, again, it's related to high amounts of leaching and high amounts of weathering. So it's a very thick soil that's bright orange. Well, in this case, it's not so bright, but it is orangey red, and that's due to the iron oxide. Okay, so this is actually a laterite soil. And then in this diagram, you see that's why they show it in orange, very thick. Okay, so very thick orange. So when this type of soil is dry, it's actually really hard. So farming is not going to be that easy in this type of soil. And this just shows you a close-up of the United States and the soil names, the soil orders. So that brings us to the end of soils, and now we're going to start talking about groundwater.